Come in and gather like a really early morning support group. I'm Bernard Donoghue, and I'm the director of the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions, and also the Mayor of London's ambassador for culture and tourism. Welcome to the V&A Museum of Childhood. You're incredibly brave to come to the V&A Museum of Childhood during half term. Because at the end of this session there will be a tsunami of children arriving at 10 o'clock. So if we can get out about 5:02 before this wave of enthusiasm and young energy comes in, that would be marvellous. And welcome to the new Citizenship project launch today of what is brilliantly called a field guide and toolkit for cultural entrepreneurs. Those are all genuine words, so they're a thing. But mostly what today is about is not just a launch, but it's also an invitation to a concept and a new way of working and thinking about things. We at Alva have been working with the New Citizenship Project for a while now, and in particular thinking about what it means for attractions, museums, galleries, heritage sites and others to refocus their work and their philosophy and their mission, to think about working with audiences rather than for audiences, and to include and engage everybody in the mission and the purpose that they have in order to share ideas, in order to come up with new ideas and new perspectives. And actually this is a brilliant place to be doing that, because immediately behind you in that studio, this is a physical demonstration of everything that we're going to be talking about this morning. This is a studio which is open to the public, and in there the new Museum of Childhood is being created organically, developmentally, every day, including with input from people who visit, local community, etc., etc. So it's absolutely breathing everything that we're talking about this morning. A couple of housekeeping things. As far as we know, there's no fire alarms, there's no floods. Boris Johnson is not due to arrive, so you should be in a place of zen and calm. The morning is divided into 3 sections, very deliberately, and they're going to be participative and immersive. So in a second I'm just going to introduce Katie and John to come up and talk about their work. But the other 2 really big things is that you've got a physical copy of the guide here, but also there's a downloadable copy on the New Citizenship Project website as well. So do share that. The whole point of the exercise is to get the kind of thinking, the kind of case studies, the kind of evidence that has been curated and culled over the course of the last 8 months or so in as many hands as possible. So, 3 chunks this morning. I'm going to hand over to Katie and John first of all to introduce the first chunk and what we're going to do and how it works.
Cool.
Good morning, thank you so much for joining us. It's very loud. Really, really great to be here. Before we get started, I'd just like everyone, if you feel comfortable doing so, to close your eyes. If you don't, then keep them open, but if you can, close them. And just going to give you about a minute to think about a time, the last time that you felt part of something. That you might be part of a sports team, you might have had a shared lunch with colleagues, maybe you got together with your neighbours to do something. Just want you to remember that feeling of feeling really part of something. Okay, you can open your eyes. What I'd like you to do is just hold on to that feeling throughout the morning, because it might be helpful to sort of draw back on what we're talking about this morning is participation in a way that you might not have encountered before. So just call back to that feeling. If you didn't think of anything, that's also fine. Something might come to you later on your way home, on your way to work. But for now, I'm going to hand over to John, and he's just going to give a bit of an overview of who we are and what we're all doing here this morning.
Which feels like about time, right? So my name's John, I'm one of the founders of the New Citizenship Project. In those cases, it's so great to have you all here, and from what's really the next stage in kind of opening up a conversation that we're super excited to have been starting and building over the last year, actually. What I want to do now is just introduce us as an organisation and then say a bit more about what we're going to be doing this morning and the kind of big idea. we like to say we're a consultancy with a difference. We are a consultancy, but we have a kind of pretty clear idea of what we believe in and what we're trying to do in the world. So we say we help organisations do stuff better because we think of people differently. We start by thinking of people as participants in causes, not just consumers of products and services and experiences even. And where that takes us is really into projects that feel like explorations and inquiries rather than sort of us providing a service. And one of the things we really love to do, we've done it in various spaces, in various sectors and aspects of society, from membership organisations to food, is to bring organisations from across a sector together to share an inquiry. And this project and this handbook, this field guide, are the output of a project in the cultural heritage sector as we defined it. And the question we were asking that these 6 organisations came together around was this one: how can cultural institutions work with people to shape cultural heritage? And the organisations that came together were these, so the Treligga House, a property in Wales in the National Trust, Fountains Abbey and Studley Royal in another National Trust property but in the north of England, Royal Pavilion Museums, Brighton and Hove, York Minster Cathedral, the National Archives and the Wellcome Collection, all kind of attracted to that question, not to an answer that we were offering, but to a question. And we're still sort of holding and evolving that question today and in what you've got with you. Where we got to really was a kind of, and what just to share the kind of the key ideas that have come out so far. Where we got to really is that this recognition that actually participation is a subject in the sector already. Of course it is. It's something that's been talked about for a long time, but it's something that so often just tends to be kind of, the word tends to kind of get co-opted and put in a box and put over in some aspect of what we're doing rather than being right at the heart. And and the second thing so what we really want to do with this isn't to sort of preach an entirely new story into the sector, but where we got to with our participants was going, there's something that needs to be named and a distinction that needs to be drawn that says actually a small idea of participation isn't enough, and we need to get bigger and go further than that. And then this idea of cultural entrepreneurs is recognising that the 12 people that we were working with are all already trying to work with some of these ideas. So really this morning and this piece of work isn't about, as I say, kind of about trying to launch some brand new thing. It's about saying there's people already doing something really exciting. Can we be a bit more disciplined about naming what it is we're doing? And can we equip those people to be able to do more of it without getting distracted and co-opted by some of the sort of business as usual mentalities? So with that in mind, if you take only one thing from today, the thing we really want to empower and give to everybody who's trying to work in this way in this sector, is we think there's kind of one big question that you can really be holding. So the big idea, as it were, that sits at the heart of this is really this question. What are you trying to do in the world that's so big you need more people and more diverse people to help you do it? We see this as a question, a challenge that you can sort of be taking into your organisations and holding and a conversation to start that actually elevates participation up and says, if we're really trying to do something and not just sort of stay as we are or be static, then we're gonna, if we can name that and see something really big, then we need people to work with us to do it. And that fundamentally shifts what participation is from something that, and we really loved as we were working this and sort of, this was a project where we were working in workshop formats with people, but also interviewing leaders across the sector, where we met Bernard through this process. And we came across one particular idea, which was this language of participation light. And you'll find this on page 8 of your field guide if you want to kind of dig into this a bit more. This is the kind of core idea. Is language of participation light, coined by Bernadette Lynch, a museum scholar. And she sort of names this thing as too much of participation in the sector gets dragged back down to that level. And what we're trying to do, I think, is name and draw out something we're calling purposeful participation, something that starts from that kind of question, that big idea of what are we really trying to do here, and goes from there. And when you go there, you do get to a place where you're thinking of people as partners in doing something we couldn't do alone, not us and them. You're thinking of people as shaping what you're doing and the work you're doing in the world, rather than just being shaped. You're thinking of purpose, not a sort of proposition to be solved. You're thinking dynamically in something that's ever evolving, not something static. as Bernard referred to, with, not for. And that last line of kind of not, it's so often participation in this kind of thinking, I'm sure we've all experienced, feels like a nice to have. If you think of it in this way, if you can breed that conversation of what are we trying to do in the world, then it becomes a necessity. And that's really where we feel the conversations, and we're really excited to see the conversations among the 6 organisations we work with going, and today is about kind of building that conversation out and going further. So this morning we're going to do 2 things. We're going to introduce a couple of the key tools that are in this field guide, and then in the third chunk, as Bernard refers to, we're just going to tell you a bit about where this conversation is going next. But the idea of this morning is to give you a chance to engage with some of these ideas and be part of the conversation right at this early stage at the beginning. You are the pioneers. So purposeful questions. So the first tool is about how do you ask. We feel the starting point in doing this is trying to get to a question for your organisation that expresses the purpose of that organisation in a way that can inspire participation. And then the second thing is this personal profile, which speaks to the second piece of language that we've got on the front cover of our book of cultural entrepreneurs, which is we're hoping to build an identity among people like you, among us in this room, to say this is who we are. We are entrepreneurs. We're leading from within our organisation, starting new things and having the kind of space to do that. And what we've got in the field guide is a bit of a profile with some skills and tools and characteristics you might need to live that. So we're going to come into that in a minute, but just before we do, we wanted to invite the guys from the Museum of Childhood just to come up. Now, the reason why we're here, like we say, we see this work as something that is already happening. Like, this isn't us inventing something, it's us naming something and equipping something so that it can be done more consciously. And so when we were coming to launch, we didn't want to go to one of the places we've been working with. We wanted to look out and see where did we see this really emerging as the sorts of thing we're talking about emerging as a way of working. And we came to the Museum of Childhood and we saw the open studio and we got very excited. So we're really happy to be here. We just wanted to give the guys a couple of minutes just to say a bit more about what's going on here if we can. So I think Gina's coming up.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Gina Kucika and I'm the director here, at least for the last 6 months. I'm a relatively new director. And it's amazing to welcome you here. So I wanted to thank you for giving us this opportunity to say a little bit of what we're doing in the museum. So we have a really difficult task because we have a museum that is loved by our communities, 95% satisfaction, 60% repeat visitors. So they loved us, and they loved us despite telling us that we're a little bit dark and gloomy and have too many glass cases. And they love coming, but they would like to open the glass cases. So when Tristan Hunt became director of the V&A, he listened carefully and was really passionate and interested of making this museum a dynamic place for children. So from the start, when the base-built architects came on board, Amadeus Ryan, they worked with school groups, both primary and secondary, teachers, special needs groups and teachers, family groups, and our local residents to understand what would make this much-loved museum even more loved, even better. So by looking at our collections, by looking at what we're doing, they came up with ideas like having a kaleidoscopic staircase in the middle of the marble floor, that we were there in the morning looking at our optical toys. And all this has continued where we are now into them fit out, into doing the galleries. So we are working with the groups that I mentioned before and new groups to understand what would they like to see in the galleries, how can we animate not only the Museum of Childhood collections, but the whole of the Victoria and Albert Museum collections. One of the things that they have told us, and sounds very nice, but it's quite hard, they want to make the most joyful museum in the world. So that's my big question. How are we going to make the most joyful museum of the world? Keep it for the next 10, 15 years, not for one day. And how am I going to measure that? At the end of the section, I can take you inside the open studio and talk a little more about the galleries, if that is useful for you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gina, and hopefully you can see in that, I mean, beautifully preluding our first exercise actually, but some of these ideas and the type of relationship that's going on, that's starting to breathe here, and we just love the fact that this is happening in this space and then playing out across the museum that you've come into. So, without further ado, getting into the first sort of tool and giving you a chance to get your hands on it, as it were. Purposeful questions. So this is really about saying, so if the challenge is what are you trying to do in the world that's so big, how do you articulate that? And Gina has beautifully put it as how can we make the most joyful museum in the world? And that structure is something that we've been playing with all of our participants, and that's kind of come through as a really powerful one. So what we're going to set up is a way of thinking, and going to ask you to have a think about how might you think of your institution, your organisation as a question. Because that's the biggest purposeful question you're going to articulate. And we suggest this structure. How can we work together with X to achieve Y? And we're going to set that up in a minute, but just before we do, in the guide you'll find from sort of about page 16 onwards, we try and articulate what feel like some really important properties. What are the sort of properties of a really good question? So we're just going to set that up now, drawing on some examples from outside the sector and from within our process. And I'm going to talk a bit about the outside the sector, and Katie's going to give you a bit of the story from inside our process. And then we'll get you into a conversation. And so start the cogs whirring. Be thinking in the background. Nice challenge for you early on the morning. But we're going to get into that now. So, first property that we've identified of what makes a really good question is this idea of being specific, not generic. And the reason, like speaking of this in museum world, like in cultural heritage world, often we let ourselves go into quite a generic space when we talk about mission and purpose. It's sort of, we want to create well-being, and I'll say in a minute a perfect example of this from within our process, but we're often, like, there's a sort of, museums, cultural places, these are good for society, and we kind of, these sorts of words are very abstract and distant. And so to bring that, what we feel is really important is to bring that down to something really specific, something that's very concrete and specific to your institution. And to give you a couple of examples, and this is the first, the outside the sector one is an organisation, a company called Brewdog that some of you may know. You'll get to know them quite well through the course of the field guides. We dug into them very deeply for some work we were doing and pulled them apart a bit with the help of the participants in our process. But the reason for talking about them in the context of this idea of specific, not generic, they don't just say we want to have a great company, we want to make lots of money, we want to kind of contribute to the economy, any of that sort of big, broad businessy stuff. They say very specifically, we want to make everyone as passionate about great craft beer as we are. Now, it's not the loftiest mission in the world, that I will grant you, but the specificity of it unlocks a huge amount of creativity in that organisation because they're trying to grow love of a thing, grow love of beer. That makes them operate in very different ways. That took them to a place where they effectively invented equity crowdfunding because they didn't want to take a funder who would just make them behave like a normal business. So before any of the platforms existed, they created the concept of equity punks. They have an AGM that's 6,000 people. It's basically a piss up in a brewery, but they do AGM stuff. They've created a training qualification called the Cicerone, which is basically like a sommelier but for beer. So, and you see all that's unleashed by not just thinking about a kind of generic, like we're doing a thing, but by something very specific. How can everything we do, and you'll see it all over the bottles of everything that you see from Brewdog, that core idea. And we think there's something that really could be stolen from that. So specific, not generic. And in our process...
Can you hear me okay? In our process, you can see this is Justin and Casey from Fountains Abbey and Studley Royal. Got Justin with us. When we first started chatting about purpose, they talked a lot about world peace. And as a UNESCO site, sort of world peace is really, really important. But it's arguably something that's done by lots of institutions, and it's sort of wider impact, not something that Fountains could hold on its own, or if they did, it felt quite like, oh, this is quite heavy. So what we wanted them to think about was, what is it about your institution that could definitely contribute to that wider impact, but that could drive your organisation? And what they started to think about was this idea of self-knowledge. How can we push this more in individuals and in one another? And Fountains, as a place, if you haven't been, is a real place of reflection and tranquility and beauty. And so going back to that, started to think about what might our contribution be. And they articulated this question, which is, how can we work with our visitors, staff and volunteers to provoke deeper understanding of our own and others' cultural identities? And what this did was it sort of reframed the role that fountains have from trying to hold world peace to contributing towards it, which felt a lot more manageable and something that they could definitely invite people to be part of.
Cool. So the second property that we talked about and got to in the process was this idea of strategic, not superficial. And we sort of hinted at this a few times, but like this is about kind of how is it something, how can you articulate a question that is really something that is deep in what your organisation is actually trying to do in the world. This is where we're pointing to this, rather than something that's sort of what are we doing and how can people kind of contribute to it at the edges. Like how do you get right to the core? And our example here is actually sort of another slightly unexpected one, but the Bank of England. And they've been on a really fascinating journey over the last couple of years, and led by Chief Economist Andy Haldane. They're doing some really interesting things. Not just, and what you might think of as kind of engagement by Bank of England is sort of going out and telling people we're really very important. And you really ought to understand economics. And it's not that at all. They've actually come to a place where the most exciting thing they're doing is they're creating a network of regional citizens' assemblies to actually deliberate on monetary policy, on fiscal policy, because they feel that the recognition, and this is the words of Andy Haldane, he said, we can't make the right economic policy, we can't make the right monetary policy unless we work with people, because it's what it means on the ground in reality that is going to shake it. And we don't have that expertise in the Bank of England. So he's talking about people as actually being experts in their own experience and needing that expertise to do the core role of the Bank of England right. And if the Bank of England's asking itself those kinds of questions and trying to work in that way, some of our participants in the process were like, that's a great example, because if they're doing it, then I can beat people over the head in my institution and say, surely we can. So I think that spirit of not something that's at the edges that's going, we're going to come and tell you what we do, but something that's really going, how do we work with people to do what we do in a way that we can only do with their input. And in our process,
we had Susan and Helen, got Susan with us from Royal Pavilion and Museums in Brighton and Hove. And quite early on, they articulated this question. How can we work with our communities to contribute to and celebrate the identities of Brighton and Hove? And we just thought they spoke, the particular example that really speaks to this property is the discussion that we had around the deaf community as a community that they really, really wanted to work with. But going back to this question, in the past they'd sort of felt like they had to do stuff for that community, which inevitably led to questions around, do we have the budget around it? Can we actually do that? Working from this, they realised that actually the deaf community are sort of vital for us to build that relationship with. And so what they did was they started really simply, and they just went out and had a conversation with that community about how might we work together to bring a celebration of Deaf Brighton into our work, which is a completely different starting point to the one that they'd had previously.
So that shift felt very powerful for those guys. The third and final property, so your last kind of clue to latch onto, and you've got, like we say, you've got all this in your books, so be getting ready to get into a bit of a conversation. Sustain, not one-off, and it speaks to a similar point, but just transfers it into time really, and just to say, this work, thinking in this way, is something that is about ongoing engagement. And putting it into sort of project-based work is often kind of death to this. And so to this kind of participation like often can sit in project-based stuff, but purposeful participation demands to be a kind of core question and an ongoing question. And our example from outside here, which we really love, is a Better Reykjavik, or Betri Reykjavik, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing appallingly because my Icelandic accent isn't ideal. But this is a platform, one of the most exciting examples of digital democracy that's from around the world. Really brutally simple, actually. It's a platform where any citizen of Reykjavik can propose an idea for how the city might be better. And the ideas are upvoted and downvoted, but with this explicit contract with the city administration, where the top ideas every month are then debated in a special session of the council with a predisposition to enactment. And that contract of power, that sort of explicit power relationship, has meant that something like 70% of the population of Reykjavik participate in this thing. So it's not just a little platform over in an edge, but critically in this context, it's a sustained thing. It's an open conversation, ongoing all the time, not just a kind of a thing that happens in an election cycle, but a sustained conversation about how might we, as citizens and the administration, make the city better together. And that so that idea of not just a one-off, but actually something that's sustained and embedded at the core is a really important one. And in our process?
In our process, we had Catherine and Steve from the National Archives, got Steve with us. And the National Archives are a really interesting organisation because they're legally bound, they have a legal obligation to preserve the records of the state for people now, for people past, gone, for people in the future. But a sort of light bulb for us was when they first came into the process and they talked about the National Archive not just being that, but actually the opportunity that they have to sort of tell the story of the nation, which we found really exciting. And when they were thinking about participation in this way, they initially went to sort of how do we do this on a big project level, sort of looking to the future, how might we make that a real sort of lead with participation solely on that project, which was really exciting. But what they found it was that they weren't getting around to it, sort of day to day was getting in the way. And so what they did was they went back to the question that they'd articulated about the National Archive, which was, how can we work with citizens to connect with the past, to inform the present and future? And going off of that, they started to think about how might we build a more sort of sustained way of working with participation that isn't just kept to one project, but actually is a commitment to a way of working, which is sort of a brand new thing, if you don't mind me saying, at the archive, like a brand new way of thinking. And it's led to really interesting conversations about what membership might look like at the archive. It's also led to sort of participatory experiments as part of exhibitions and collections. And it's just started that conversation about what might participation mean, how might we do it in a way that feels quite honest and true to what they're trying to do.
So, those are your 3 prompts. So to remind you, as we set you up into a bit of a conversation, with just this challenge for you, what are you trying to do in the world that's so big you need more people and more diverse people to enable you to do it? And the framing and structure of the question we invite you to try and start to form, and like, you're not going to get it perfect now, it's like, right, you've got 5 minutes on a morning, but try and just start to play with this structure. How can we work together with X to achieve Y? And our invitation would be, look around the room, find someone you don't know, you've never spoken to before, and just help play with introducing your organisation to them by trying to frame it as a question. Get each other's help. Don't try and make it perfect, but just try and just have a first play with this idea of, like, if I were to think of my institution, the place I work, as a question, what is that inquiry? And take Gina's example, how can we, together with the visitors and the children and everybody, make the most joyful museum in the world? There's a lovely example. The examples we've given, you've got them in your book, page 16 onwards. Have a little work together and see where you get. We're going to give you 10 minutes or so for this, so like we say, no pressure.
Remember, like, the person that you go and speak to might not know your organisation, so just go with your instinct and see what you come up with.
So, 10 minutes, find someone you don't know, and we'll call you, and Bernard will call you back in a moment. Thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt, if you wouldn't mind pausing your conversations. This feels like interrupting a really good speed dating session, so apologies for that. What's fab is the sheer amount of A, laughter, and B, buzz in the room when you're talking about the question that both Katie and John posed. Did anyone come out with some blinders? Nothing that you'd admit to, that's fair. The next session is about cultural intrapreneurs, and that is a word because Wikipedia has got it, so therefore it's real. And one of the things, when I was Googling it last night, trying to work out what it meant in this context, it said that there are 5 traits of a successful intrapreneur: entrepreneurial spirit, you're a person of dynamic thought and action; commitment to innovation, you're a serial social change agent; Appetite for risk and reward, you're excited by risk. Appetite for competition, and high confidence and self-esteem. So no pressure. Basically, you are the most creative, dynamic risk taker in the entire organisation, but you need to persuade everyone to come on your journey. And I know from the organisations that I'm involved in, I'm on the board of St Paul's Cathedral and the People's History Museum, and I chair the council of WWF, World Wide Fund for Nature. And we have the same kind of mantra in this, and they're very, very different organisations, but it's essentially, what is it that you want your visitor or your member to think and feel and do as a result of joining or a result of visiting? What is it that you want your visitor to think and feel and do as a result of crossing your threshold? And it's kind of no more sophisticated than that, really. And it comes back to John and Katie's points about being really, really tactical and really, really specific. But the role of the cultural entrepreneur, therefore, is to be that catalyst, to be that the kind of person within the organisation who doesn't believe their own propaganda, and to ask the difficult questions about reframing mission and purpose and the genuine definition of engagement. So I'm going to hand over to Katie now, just to go through that in a bit more and to set you up for another chat.
Hi again. If I could just ask our participants just to come a little bit closer so I'm not like, So what we found in this process was that actually, as we said earlier, there's lots of things already happening a lot in the sector, and it's led by individuals exactly like you guys, exactly like our 12 participants. This is what's going to enable sort of change to happen. And we were really interested in pushing this further, so at the final workshop we got with participants to start to discuss and think about, we did an exercise on what would make it more likely for people, what are the characteristics that are needed to really push on purposeful participation and to be an effective cultural entrepreneur. And where we got to was 5 principles, which are personal sense of organisational purpose, unlikely alliance building, persistence, play to win, and self-confidence. And rather than me explain what they are, what I'm going to do is invite each of our participants up, and they're going to talk to a principle and sort of a bit of how they found it in the process, what it actually means to them on an individual level, taking it from here into what's it actually like to live and work with and sort of embody this characteristic. So we're going to kick off with Rhiannon, who's going to come up, and she's going to talk to personal sense of organisational purpose.
I'm Rhiannon. I'm property manager of Tredegar House in South East Wales for the National Trust, which is the best job in the world ever. And we went on this journey with these guys because participation is really something that we know is important, we want to do, but we kind of weren't sure what it really means for us. And this was one of the kind of areas that worked for my brain. It's kind of what it says on the can. It's you as an individual really understanding what your organisation's purpose is. What is it we're here to do? Why are we all together? But the part that you play as an individual, what can you action? What can you move forward? What makes you get up each day? And the sense part, it kind of gives you permission for it not to be perfect. It's not perfectly written down, and actually it can flex and change a little bit depending on what the other drivers around you are. But the bottom line is you really understand the purpose, what it is we're here to do. This was a light bulb moment for me. We worked on our property's purpose. The National Trust as an organisation has a huge realm of things we're here to do. It's hard to do all of it. So what part does Tredegar House play in the National Trust? And we worked on that as a team. We worked on it really participatively. And for me, I've now got this tool, my Tredegar House purpose, and it's a lens for me to make decisions. It's a lens for me to say no to stuff. And it's also a way for me to kind of open up opportunities that I maybe wouldn't have considered 12 months ago before we started this with these guys. So this was something that really resonated with me through the process.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Set the mandate now. So next up we've got unlikely alliance building, so I'd like to ask Susan to come up and speak to this one.
Hi, I'm Susan Estelle. I'm from Royal V&A Museum and I'm a community engagement officer. So I'm kind of one step ahead on time because that's kind of what I'm supposed to be doing, participating and working with communities. The alliance building, I think, is one of those things that's really quite important, because whoever you are in your organisation, when you're trying to do this sort of work, if this is new or you're trying to push it further or embed it more, who are you going to be working with? Because you can't do everything yourself. No matter if you're Superman, Superwoman, you need to be working with people. So your alliances are not always the people you think they're going to be, and don't always, maybe it's not always the people who are going to pat you on the back and say, oh, you're doing a good job, yes, carry on as you are, because actually none of us need that. We need often to be inspired and pushed and sometimes picked up on things we're not doing well enough. Because as the sort of nice bit that was referred to earlier, lots of organisations think they're doing these things and they're doing them well enough, but actually we need to keep reinventing the wheel. We keep on looking, and actually if you listen to your communities and participants and the people who are wanting your organisation to be the most joyous museum or whatever it is that you are, you will hear that actually they do have things that they might say, oh yeah, well yeah, we did have a nice time last year, but actually we want you to go further. How do we go further? So you're going to have alliances in your museum, your organisation, but also lots of the people to build them up with, other people in the sector, but your communities, who's out there, who's going to be promoting you, but who's also going to push you to question yourselves and to work harder, to make that a proper, embedded way of working rather than one-off events or occasions or projects, even at last year's, but how do you change your organisation and move on up? And that's the other thing, you need your people at the top involved as well, and that's really, really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Next up, we've got persistence, so I'm going to invite Vicky up to talk to this one.
I'm Vicky, and until recently I was the Assistant Director of Collections and Learning at York Minster. York Minster is the largest medieval cathedral in Northern Europe and is the lead church in the north of England. It's big on mission, inviting everyone to discover God's love. But it also has almost 2,000 years worth of history, traditions and ways of doing things which make it difficult to get anything done quickly. I know my organisation isn't alone in this, and we all found at times that the red tape around decision making made it very difficult, and that's as decision makers as well. So we felt persistence was really important. As cultural entrepreneurs, we're blessed with the ability to see the future and what could be. However, the flip side is that it can feel incredibly frustrating and disheartening when people aren't jumping up and down with excitement at the next thing that you're looking at, such as purposeful participation. It's obvious to me that this is the right way to work and will make a big difference to the people around us. But I understand that for other people, it builds questions such as, why do we need to change? Is it more work? Will it cost more? And who will make it happen? So to tackle this, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve which apparently make me tenacious. I seek out people who are energised by an idea I'm trying to get adopted and get them talking. The more people you have talking about it and in your corner, the more difficult it becomes to ignore an idea. For those that are less comfortable with an idea, I try to understand where their concerns are coming from and help them see how this way of working will make their lives easier. I identify quick win projects and start building a body of evidence that combats concerns. And finally, I keep going. I don't die in a ditch over an idea that's going nowhere, but I am agile in my arguments and adaptable in my way of working. When I reach a dead end, I step back, look at my options, and then set off in an energetic way again. It can take time, but that's okay. You will have the same conversations over and over again, possibly with the same people, but that's okay too. It is worth it, I promise you.
Thanks, Vicky. Next up, we've got Justin, who's going to talk to Play to Win.
Morning, Justin. I'm General Manager of Fountains Abbey and Studley Royal, which is a World Heritage Site and one of the top 5 busiest properties in the Trust. That's relevant to what I'm going to say in a moment. Also, interestingly, the monks who founded Fountains in 1132 left York Minster because you were all corrupt and slackers. There we go. The opposite of playing to win is playing not to lose. And I think what was liberating for me was perhaps the burden of the preciousness. And I deliberately talk about the foundation in 1132. I talk about being one of the busiest properties in the Trust, and as a World Heritage Site, one of the 1,000 most important heritage sites in the world. So as long as I don't lose, I'm fine. If I go home at night and I haven't burnt it down, and we haven't gone bankrupt, and the visitor experience scores are acceptable, I've succeeded. And I think what was liberating for me was turning that round to actually playing to win. What did I actively achieve today? And the second point of that, which it mentions in here, is those barriers to playing to win were actually in my head. I'd actually put those constraints of I mustn't break this precious thing, I'd have put them in my own head. When we started to make mistakes, the organisation was, hey, that's fine, you're learning, you're doing something different. So that was the really thing I wanted to talk to, was play to win.
And last but not least, we've got self-confidence, and Steve is going to talk to this one.
Hi everyone, I'm Steve Burgess, Head of Events and Exhibitions at the National Archives, and I'm going to say a few words about self-confidence, the captures of self-confidence. In the field guide it says, recognising your own energies, your strengths and your vulnerabilities is key to self-confidence. And it also talks about being a change maker in your organisation, how you need to sort of trust your instincts and bring your own flavour to the work, and almost, I think, quite important, have fun whilst you're doing it. That's really important. And these are great coordinates to work around when you're doing this kind of work. In the team, they really help to sort of be a bit braver, decision making, be a bit bolder. We've taken some sort of leaps of faith. And the other thing I'd add is the spirit of learning through doing is actually really, really vital. I think that's the way to kind of keep these things going and keep moving forward. At T&A, at the National Archives, we're right at the start of our participation journey, like we said earlier on. So we're building our confidence step by step. To date, our best success has been with our current exhibition, it's called Protect and Survive, Britain's Cold War Revealed. And it's a really, really simple idea. It's been done 100,000 times before. And essentially at the end of the exhibition, we've installed 3 typewriters, and we've invited the visitor to share their memories of Cold War Britain from their point of view. And because the Cold War is so comfortably within living memory, we thought this is a great opportunity to engage with our audiences and to see what they've got to say. Like I say, it's really, really simple. But the engagement we've had back from people has just been astonishing. It's been really overwhelming. We thought it was quite a nice idea, thought it would work, but actually we've been sort of overwhelmed with the response that we've received. So what we've learned is together with our visitors, we've actually created a much more vivid picture of what the Cold War was like, what it's like to actually live through. And by placing sort of, I guess, ordinary people's stories alongside the records of state, the official records of state, we've actually kind of provided a real life context to those records that by themselves they wouldn't have achieved on their own. We've actually kind of made it a much richer experience. And all of this has helped us kind of to keep finding within the team our own self-confidence, but also within the organisation our sense of self-confidence and our sense of purpose. So we're called the National Archives, but I think a better way, what we've learned, a better way to think about ourselves is the nation's archive. And we keep the nation's story in that sense. And the nation's story goes far beyond like the official records of state. It's everyone's story. It's written by everyone. And it's about the people in the documents, but also about the people who aren't in the documents. I think that's kind of been the eureka moment for us. We've kind of suddenly had a much more broad or clearer sense of what we're for. So to conclude, I would say with self-confidence, it's certainly about being bold, having fun, finding out through doing, but don't dismiss the simple ideas because they can have a much bigger effect than maybe you anticipate. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So hopefully that's given you a sort of a good insight into the characteristics, what feels important, but also what it actually means to people and how you might take that back to your organisation, your individual way of working. What we're going to do is, what I'd love is if you could go back to the person that you were chatting to a minute ago and just have a quick conversation about how did those characteristics feel? Was there one in particular that stood out to you? And if there was, why was that? Just going to give you a couple of minutes to do that in your own time. Get going.
Sorry to interrupt again. We're coming to the end of the session now. Apologies for interrupting your conversation. When Vicky from York Minster was talking, this is so left field, so forgive me, I was reminded of a tweet that Mark Gatiss, you know, the comedian and actor Mark Gatiss, he put out the other day, that he's clearly been watching RuPaul's Drag Race UK, and said that actually the perfect drag name for Boris Johnson is Diana Ditch. And you just think that's working on so many levels of genius. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with what you've been talking about. It's just something I needed to get off my chest. I think one of the last things that have brought all of these conversations together is something that we see at ALVA all the time. So Association of Leading Visitor Attractions, it's all the museums, galleries, visitor attractions that get around about 1 million visitors per year. And therefore this stuff isn't just academic and theoretical, it's just not nice to have, it's absolutely necessary. And it's commercially necessary too, because one of the things that we know from visitor figures this year that we compile from all of our members is that EU, which is 75% of all visitors to the UK, really down this year. And staycation, us Brits holidaying at home, significantly increased this year, last year, and I reckon for the next 4 years. The UK domestic market is going to become more and more and more important to museums, galleries and visitor attractions, and therefore a number of our members are investing more in the domestic market, in marketing for the domestic market, as well as membership recruitment and retention. So the domestic market really talking authoritatively, accessibly, engagingly with us Brits is not only just becoming a nice thing to do because it ticks all the boxes, actually, commercially, it's an imperative. And therefore getting this stuff right becomes more and more important. One of the things that we also do at ALVA is to try and discern, are there common behaviours or DNA amongst sustainably growing, successfully growing visitor attractions? And we've come down with about 4. And they're true over the last 6 years. And the last 6 years, 7 years, as you know, have been really odd in visitor attractions terms. We've had the tail end of a recession, the imminent beginning of another one. We've had 4 general elections. We've had the collapse of the pound. We've had a Brexit referendum, Scottish referendum, Commonwealth Games, Olympic Games, Paralympic Games. Loads and loads of things going on, all of which disturb the normal visitor flow to attractions. So if you've done well and grown your audiences, and particularly grown the diversity of your audiences over the last 7 or 8 years, you've done really well, because it hasn't been the most propitious context in which to do it. And 2 of the common behaviours of those organisations who've really grown and engaged and got different people bluntly who don't look like me, coming across their threshold. One of them is the appetite for risk at senior management and trustee level. But the other one absolutely came through here staggeringly clear, which is those organisations who foster creative partnerships with unusual suspects not only are prompted to think in different ways and act in different ways, but bring different new people with them into their new sense of mission and purpose. And therefore, for all of the reasons that you've heard about today, this is a really compelling piece of work and a really timely prompt to think about how you work differently, not only to fulfill your own sense of mission and purpose, but also to engage more authentically, authoritatively and accessibly with people who come and are interested in what you've got to do. It's cold, it's a joyful museum, but it could do with warming up. So when you finish after here, there are 2 particular things. One is the studio, and the second is that the museum will be opening in a couple of minutes. So the cafe turns into a paying cafe, but I think you really deserve teas and coffees, but you just have to go and pay for them. But the second thing is really to thank you all for your participation here this morning. This feels like we've already had your best day's work done before 10 o'clock in the morning. And it's all the more important actually to bring together like-minded people to think about how we can enthuse other people with the kind of work that you're doing. So thank you very much for your participation, and I'm just now going to hand back to Irene, there you are, to wrap up the session. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone. So just a quick wrap up, my prompts are on the screen. So first thing I want to say is thank you all so much for being here on a very dark and slightly bruising cold October morning. We do really appreciate you joining us. What I would like to just leave you with is just some takeaways, things that we'd like your help with. The thing that we'd like you to do the most is obviously read the guide and get involved. As you'll have seen, towards the back of the guide, it invites you to join a new LinkedIn group called Cultural Entrepreneurs. You're all the first, hopefully the first members of that group. And we've already put a prompt in there of how we'd like you to use the group to explore these ideas around purposeful participation, cultural entrepreneurship, what that means, and hopefully to share, support each other, exchange ideas, have a go at the exercises within the field guide, and let everyone know how you're getting on. So hopefully a space to allow this community to grow and flourish. We are doing a one-day training session on the guide, on the content within the guide, and on developing a participatory strategy. We're calling it the boot camp because it's an intensive training day, ably facilitated by the New Citizenship Project team. The date of that is the 4th of December. We would love as many of you as feel able to come along, or please share it with others. Pass it on, so please share the guide, forward it to other people, talk about it to colleagues, grab a group together of people that you work with and say, I went to this breakfast this morning and this is what I found out. You'll all have had an email this morning with a copy of the guide and some other information, the website, which is purposefulparticipation.info. What we'd really appreciate you doing is maybe forwarding it on to 3, 4, 5, 10, 50, 100 friends, so that we can get the word out. Connect. So if you've had a good conversation with somebody this morning, not this afternoon, if you've had a good conversation, then maybe do swap details and keep practicing your question, keep phrasing your question, see how you're getting on, make that connection. And we would really appreciate it as well if you would share your biggest takeaway from this morning via social media using that hashtag, which is Purposeful Participation. Again, today is not the end of the project for us, it's the beginning of spreading this out into the community and getting more and more people in the cultural heritage, arts and culture sectors, and in fact elsewhere, to be thinking about what it means to do purposeful participation. Last thank yous are, of course, to our brilliant MC, Bernard, who's just been awesome this morning. Gina, Anisha, Jasmine, everybody at the Museum of Childhood for hosting us and being so brilliant and welcoming. To our excellent New Citizenship Project team who have made today happen. Yes, and to all of you again for being here.
And I think Gina's going to show a few people to the open studio, so if you want to do that, then
yeah, do have a look at the studio and of course have a look around the museum. If you want to grab any of us, we've all got the plastic badges, so do come and have a chat. Thanks very much everyone.